Good morning. If we haven't met in person, my name's Wayne. I get to be one of the pastors here at Ecclesia. My wife, Emily, and I, we have 3 kids. Moses, who's 11, about to be 12. My daughter, Aiden, is about to be 10. And then we've got a 1.5-year-old shepherd. So we have quite the spread. And if you just heard, you're like, doing the math on that, yes, I spend all my time right now chasing after a toddler. And it's such a gift. I'm really grateful, especially in a season like we're in right now, where it's the perfect time to reflect back on what was 2024 like. It's also the time when we tend to look ahead to what is 2025 going to be like. And as I look back and I think about what the last year and a half has been, I'm so grateful for my family and grateful in ways that I didn't think I would be, because part of what we discovered in the path and the journey to have Shepherd in our life, we discovered while my wife was pregnant with him that she actually had a tumor in her lung. And we wouldn't have found it if she hadn't have been pregnant, right? She was in advanced maternal age, which I'm always like, there's got to be a better way to say that, guys, you know? But because of that, they wanted to check everything out and be super careful. And so we did a whole lot of tests and scans, and that's how we found it. So he was born on 7/1/3 day in 2023, and then a few months later, right around Thanksgiving in 2023, she had surgery to have a cancerous tumor removed from her lung, which meant all of 2024 was recovery and follow-ups and doctor's appointments and all kinds of things. Today, when I stood up and talked to the team and they asked me today, like, hey, what's something you're grateful for? When I said, like, hey, I'm grateful for health, you know, like I meant it. And that sense of like, man, I'm so grateful that my wife is healthy. I'm so grateful that all my kids are healthy and that we're all here. And part of why I want to talk about that is whatever 2025 brings, here's what I'm pretty sure. Life is going to life this year, right? Life's going to start lifing and things are just going to happen. And if it's not this year, it might be next year or the year after that. And we are in this season. Like, how many of you have already been asked, what is your New Year's resolution, right? A few of you, right? How many of you are the person going around asking, what's your New Year's resolution, you know? It just happens, right? And it's a fair question. I actually really appreciated that time to look back and reflect and that time to set out with some intention. But here's the thing. If you plug this into ChatGPT and start asking about New Year's resolutions, you'll find quickly that there's this thing called Quitter's Day. Have you guys heard about Quitter's Day? This year, Quitter's Day is actually January 12th. So it's the second Friday. It's the second Friday in January. And it's apparently some of the statistics say that that is the day when about 2/3 of everyone who made a New Year's resolution says, forget it, I'm done, I'm out, right? January 12th, we're out. But here's the thing, right? Clearly there's nothing magical about a day, New Year's Day, to set some intention around our life. But for those of us who do want a different life, for those of us who do hope for something better, there's nothing magical about that day, but there's something powerful about today, right? No matter what situation I find myself in, today's the day that I can make some choices to actually carve a new path. Today's the moment where I can start to build a different kind of momentum for my future. And part of what I want to talk about today is, what if the moment and the momentum that we build in 2025 is to be people who experience and share more love with the world? That we become people who take in more of the love that is readily and freely given and around us, and we're the people who can actually give that. But if we're going to be those kind of people, we actually need to be more resilient. There are things that we have to do. There's a person we are made to become in order to take in and experience that love and to share that freely with other people. So I want to go to a passage in the scriptures that's probably one of the most famous passages in the scripture ever. And it's the story of David and Goliath. And this is a story that even if you've never picked up a Bible before in your life, even if you've never set foot in church in your life, I mean, the college football playoffs coming up, I will bet $1 million that somebody's going to make a reference to David and Goliath in the college football playoff, right? It's the ultimate underdog story. But it's such a great story. And yes, it's, like we're going to talk about what it looks like to become a people of love, and we're going to go to a story about a battle, right? In war, because that's the obvious choice. But really, no, this is a story about what does it look like to become the kind of person who sees and recognizes God's love and God's presence and is readily available and willing to extend that. So this is really the story of how is David formed into that kind of person. So I want to start in 1 Samuel chapter 17, in verse 12. It gives us a little bit of insight into David. It says, David was a son of Jesse, an Ephrathite from Bethlehem in Judah, who had 8 sons. At this time, Judah was already an old man. And Jesse's 3 oldest sons, Eliab the firstborn, Abinadab the second, and Shammah the third, had gone with Saul to the battlefield. David was the youngest son, and while the 3 oldest went with Saul, he went back and forth between Saul's battle and his father's sheep in Bethlehem, taking provisions to the troops and bringing word from the front line. So basically what's going on is his 3 oldest sons are there. He's a little nervous about what's going on, rightly so. And so he's sending his son David like, hey, go tell me what's going on. Are they still alive? Are they well? Take some provisions, put in a good word for them with their commander. Like maybe they won't get put on the front line. He's being a good dad, right? And what's happened in this is instead of trying to send both armies to battle, sometimes, because that's costly, right? It's a high cost of life. It's a high cost. It's expensive. Oftentimes what would happen in these kinds of situations is they would pick one person in the army and say, hey, you go pick a fight, and whoever wins between these 2 individuals, then that army now wins. And then we take over the army. It's a very business, economical way to do this. So what happens, though, is the Philistines have a total stud, right? They've got Goliath, right? And before it tells you a little bit about him, he's over 9 feet tall. I mean, he is big. He is strong. He's the kind of guy, if you're who's going to win in hand-to-hand combat? Goliath is the guy that you pick. And so this is where it picks up. It says in verse 16, for 40 days, this Philistine giant, Goliath of Gath, stepped forward, challenging the men of Israel every morning and evening. But no one was brave enough to accept the challenge. And honestly, it's kind of hard to blame them, And so Jesse said to his son David, take 3/5 of a bushel of roasted grain and these 10 loaves of bread to your brothers in the camp. Also take these 10 blocks of cheese to the commander of their company. See how your brothers are doing and bring me some word from them. And it says that David rose early the next morning, left the sheep in the care of another, took the provisions, and obeyed Jesse's instructions. Now, here's what's interesting, is part of what's happening here is David at this point has already had an experience with someone named Samuel who has come to his whole family and actually in a line of all his brothers anointed him with some oil like we did with Samuel this morning, which was beautiful, by the way. Love to see you guys here. Had anointed him with oil and said, this person, David, is going to become the future king of Israel. So David's already had this experience. But what we see here is that David is actually really humble. That when David's dad says, hey, I need you to go do this thing, first thing he does, early the next morning, he rises up, he goes, and he does it. And here's the truth. If we want to have a new me, if we want to have the kind of life that God has created us for, we need to be more humble. And it's not just that he obeyed his father's orders. What you might miss is that to be the shepherd in this situation, it's not the job you're clamoring for, right? It's not the position that you want. The reason he's got that is because he's the youngest. And what you may not know is that oftentimes in these kinds of societies, and this is true even to this day, in a lot of Bedouin type societies, shepherds are typically the youngest, and it's often the girls. That it's often typically the girls in the society, probably between ages 7 and 11. Now, you can imagine, David's got older brothers, right? How do you think his brothers treated and talked to David, right? Why don't you go and do the little girl's job, right? Why don't you go back to that? He's got those kinds of voices in his head. And David is the kind of person who says, you know what? This is my job, and I'm going to do it. And so some of the questions that I ask myself or have to ask myself when I'm trying to figure out what does it look like to be humble is I have to ask, what do I feel like is beneath me? What are the things that I'm not willing to step into because I feel like, oh, that's somebody else's job, or that should be somebody else's job? And the truth is that what actually forms us into the kind of person that has the courage to face somebody like Goliath is we have to be willing to be humble. And we have to be willing to do the small thing. It goes on. It says, David left the provisions with the person in charge of baggage. He ran to the front lines and shoved his way through the soldiers to greet his brothers. As David talked with them, Goliath, the Philistine champion from Gath, emerged again and shouted his challenge to the men of Israel. And this time, young David heard his words. And when they saw Goliath, all the Israelites were frightened and retreated from him. That's important. We're going to come back to that later. And the soldiers said, have you seen this man who steps forward? He's trying to taunt Israel. Our king will reward the man who kills him with wealth, a royal marriage, and freedom for his entire family from taxation and obligations in Israel. Like, that sounds like a pretty good deal. Like, sign me up for that, right? Tax day's coming. And David said, asking those around him, what is the reward for removing this insult from Israel by killing this man? No uncircumcised Philistine can get away with taunting the armies of the living God. And already you can kind of get a window and insight into, like, David sees the world differently, right? He sees things. We're going to come back. And the soldiers kept saying, they said, you've heard what will be given to the man who kills him. We were just talking about it. And I love this little interaction. So David's oldest brother, Eliab, overheard the conversation and became angry with David. And Eliab said, why have you come down here? Who is watching your tiny flock in the wilderness, right? Can you hear the condescension in there? I'm your brother, and I know you. You're arrogant, and your heart is evil. You've come to watch the battle as if it were just entertainment. And here's the other thing about humility, too. Humility is not thinking little of ourselves. It's not belittling ourselves. Humility is actually thinking less about ourselves. Humility is when we actually begin to put the needs of others over and above our own. And that's true for two things, because one, it actually recognizes the fact that we are all made in the image of God. That God has placed inside of each and every single one of us unique gifts and talents and abilities. That he's given us so much. And so part of what it means to be humble is actually to be resistant and resilient against the voices that come into our lives and tell us all the things that we're not. All those voices that creep in and say, you're not enough. You'll never be enough. You're not smart enough. You're not talented enough. You're not attractive enough. Right? David's got plenty of those voices coming into his life, but what he is he's resilient to it. And watch how he responds, right? I love this. He just says, what have I done now? I was just asking a question. But look at what it says. It says, David ignored him and asked another soldier the same question. And the people gave him the same answer. And here's part of what I know about humility, right? Is humility and curiosity are going to go hand in hand. And how he responds to the attacks and the insults and everything that's coming at him is to ignore it and then start asking questions. The moment I stop being curious is always the moment I stop being humble. And that's true whenever I've decided, when I'm in an argument with somebody about, well, this is this person's intent. This is what they've done, right? I may even be right, but I can guarantee you in that moment, I'm not going to be humble. I'm going to be really condescending, and it's going to make the whole conversation go bad, right? But when I actually engage with curiosity, it goes so different. What would it look like for us to be the people that when those voices come in, and I know you've got them, who tell you all the things that you're not, what if you could respond back with, well, what am I capable of? What has God invited me to do? What has God gifted me to do? And that curiosity in and of itself helps to make you more resilient to it. But it's not just about being humble. There's more to it. So the story goes on. After news, what have I done now? When news of David's valiant words reached the king, Saul sent for David. And David said to Saul, "Don't let anyone be frightened because of that man. I am your servant, and I will go and fight with him." Which is just bonkers, by the way. Like, this is nuts. And Saul actually says it. He says, "Don't be ridiculous. You can't fight the Philistine. You're only a youth, and he has been a warrior since his childhood. You lack age and experience." Again, here's more of those voices coming in. But look at what David says. He says, "I worked as a shepherd for my father," right? I did the job that no one else wants to do. Whenever a lion or a bear has come and attacked one of my lambs, I have gone after it and struck it down to rescue the lamb from the predator's mouth. If it turned to attack me, I would take it by the chin, beat it, and kill it. And what you see here is that David is the kind of person that keeps his word. And if I want to be the kind of person who steps into the life and the love that God has created for me, I need to be the kind of person who keeps my word. I mean, none of us would blame David if he came back and was like, "Yeah, that sheep, a bear came after it." Sorry, Dad, right? I don't think his dad would have been super, super upset. But what David had internally is like, no, I said I'm going to care for these sheep. So I'm going to go care for these sheep. And what's fascinating is his willingness to do and keep his word actually laid the groundwork for him to get the kind of training he needed in order to step up to this moment. So I'm curious for you and for me, where are the places where I need to keep my word? Where are the places where I need to keep my word to myself? Where are the places where I need to keep my word to other people? And it's not about being 100%. I mean, traffic, it happens, right? You're going to be late at some point this year, and it's not going to be your fault, right? But what does it look like to be the person who says, "But I did make this promise to somebody, and I said I was going to be here, so I'm just going to let them know I'm running X amount of late," right? That keeping our word doesn't mean that we have to be perfect, but keeping our word does mean that we own the promises that we make, and we acknowledge the fact when we fall short. So maybe for some of us, stepping into a life of love and experiencing and receiving more love may actually need to start with the words, "I'm sorry." Which I don't know about you, but sometimes I think those are some of the hardest words in the English language to say. But again, it's all about keeping our word. And it goes on. And he says, "I have killed both a lion and a bear. And as your servant," again, you can hear the humility, right? "As your servant, I will kill this uncircumcised Philistine too, since he has dared to taunt the armies of the living God. The eternal one who saved me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will save me from the hand of this Philistine." And Saul says, "Go then, and may the eternal one be with you." So clearly what we need is we need to be humble. We also need to be faithful. We need to be the kind of people who keep our word. But more than that, too, we also need to be the kind of people who are grateful. And here's something that's true about David. If you open up the scriptures and you go to the Psalms, what you'll find is that his name is attributed to, I can't even remember the number of Psalms, but his name is all over them. And what you get is a window into his soul, and you get a window in to see that what has happened for him is he has curated a practice of gratitude. That again and again and again, he sat down and he penned and he wrote what it looks like to pour out his heart to God and to say, "God, thank you," right? And I was recently reading in my reading plan, and I came across Psalm 69, and it says this. It says, "The name of the true God will be my song, an uplifting tune of praise and thanksgiving. My praise will please the Eternal more than if I were to sacrifice an ox or the finest bull, horns, hooves, and all. Those who humbly serve will see and rejoice. All you seekers after God will revive your souls. The Eternal listens to the prayer of the poor and has regard for his people held in bondage. All God's creation joined together in his praise. All heaven, all earth, all seas, all creatures of the ocean deep. The true God will save Zion and rebuild the cities of Judah. so that his servants may own it and live there once again. Their children and children's children shall have it as their inheritance. And those who love his name will live in it, right? He is, and you'll find this all over the Psalms. Again and again and again, when he's in his darkest moments, when it's hard, when he's got people chasing after him, his life is literally on the line. And again, he turns and finishes with saying, God, I'm still going to praise you. And I'm still going to give thanks to you. You don't necessarily see this practice in the story, in David and Goliath, but what you do see is what happens, is the outcome of practicing and curating this practice of gratitude. Because what it does is it changes us. And more specifically, what it does is it changes our perspective. It changes how we see the world. And you can already see a glimpse of it, but the story goes on. So it says, so Saul outfitted David in the king's own armor, a bronze helmet to protect his head and a coat of mail to protect his chest. David strapped on Saul's sword outside the armor and then discovered he could not move because he was not used to the restrictions of the weighty armor. Like, I kind of would like to see this, right? Like, it's almost like in the Christmas story, the little kid Ralphie, when he puts on all the like crazy, he's like, I can't move. You know, it's like, that's kind of what I picture David is in that kind of thing. And he says, I'm not used to these things. How can I attack an enemy when I can't even walk? No one in his day and age, no one would have gone out to fight any kind of battle without any of those things. But David sees the world totally differently. And it goes on. So it says he removed every bit of Saul's armor. He would fight the Philistine as he had fought those lions and bears. So he took his staff in his hand and went to the stream to choose 5 smooth stones, which he kept in a pouch in his shepherd's bag. And he had his sling ready as he approached the Philistine. So it's interesting to me, right? Bronze, metal, like all these fine, precious things, a sword. He looks at that and says, no, that's not what I need. And I wonder how many of us sometimes get into a situation where we're like, yes, I want a different life, but I need that thing, right? I need that job. I need that car. I need that house. I need that spouse. I need, fill in the blank. We look at it and say, I need this thing in order to have. And what David says is like, no. God's already created more than enough. And he goes down to the stream and finds that God has literally for thousands of years been carving and crafting stones and littered them across the riverbed for this very moment. And we don't see that. We don't recognize the gifts that God has given and littered all around us until we become the kind of people who are grateful, and it shifts our perspective to see, oh wait, God's actually given me more than enough. And so David picks up 5 stones, and that's what he sets out to go face the giant with. If we want to be the kind of people if we want to be the kind of people who experience love, we need to be the kind of people who practice gratitude. And so I have a proposal for you, right? If we talk about what it looks like to be humble, if we talk about what it looks like to be faithful, to keep our word, and what it looks like to be grateful, what if 2025, what if we set a goal for ourselves to be able to list and name 1,000 things that you were grateful for? Now that sounds huge, right? It sounds really big. But when you break it down, it's about 3 things a day. If you can stop and pause and name 3 things every day that you're grateful for, you'll actually exceed 1,000. And I would even change that goal slightly. Like, instead of saying, okay, I'm going to do 1,000, what if you got to 63 things you were grateful for by January 21st? Right? Just make it a little bit smaller, a little bit more manageable. Because then it doesn't feel impossible. You miss a day, okay, like you can still get back up on that horse and you can do it. But here's what I know, and here's what will happen. If you take the time to stop and pause and name the things that you're grateful for, it's going to open you up. It's going to change the way you see the world. And all of a sudden, the things that you so frequently blew right past, walked right by, or that somebody said to you and you didn't even catch it, you didn't even hear it, all of a sudden you'll start to hear and notice like, oh, that was God's provision. That was actually God telling me he loves me. That was God offering me the very thing that I needed in this moment. And if you want to take it a step further, if you find one person that you're willing to walk this journey with and say like, hey, can I just share one thing I'm grateful with? Just watch what this does to them. You know, if you've got a challenging relationship with a boss, this would be fascinating to see how this would change them, right? If your boss all of a sudden started getting from you all the things you're grateful for, it'll totally change their perspective of you too. And part of why I know this is so helpful is about 12 years ago, I found myself in a season where we had just gone through a whole lot of transition. We moved to a new city. I got a new job. So we had to also move in a new house, because we couldn't take the house to the city. And then we had a new baby for the first time, right? If you go down the list of like most stressful things to walk through, I had almost all of them, right? So I found myself in therapy for the first time in my life. And I'm so grateful that my therapist in this season took the time to listen. But one thing she recommended is like, hey, I want you to pick up this book and I want you to read it. And the book was called 1,000 Gifts by Ann Voskamp. I can't recommend it highly enough. This book changed my life. But it was just her journey of living on a farm in Kansas, right? Not on the beach, not somewhere beautiful, right? Just a farm in Kansas. And it was her journey to find and discover and write down 1,000 things that she was grateful for. And just her sharing this with me opened my eyes up to see all the gifts around me that are everywhere. If we become the people who practice and cultivate gratitude, we will become the kind of people who feel and experience God's love in even the darkest places, in even the hardest times. And we'll be the kind of people who are readily available to offer and extend and share his love at every turn because we see it and it's on the front of mind. Ecclesia, let me pray for you. God, we thank you for your grace. We thank you for your presence in our midst. We thank you for your love. And God, we ask that you would give us eyes to see all the gifts, all the provision, all the love that's around us everywhere. And God, will you fill us with that love and with that grace? And we pray all these things in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. Amen.